Hi, my name's Isabella Johnston, the Intern Whisperer, and today's tip of the week is about diversity and inclusion. I know we talk about it a lot, but honestly, it's really, really important. There are two parts to this term of diversity and inclusion. First, diversity means employing a team of people from all backgrounds representing different races, genders, religions, ages, sexualities, abilities, socioeconomic backgrounds, caregiver status, and so much more. Inclusion means that all of these people, no matter what their background is, feels supported, valued, and included at work. How each company implements these diversity and inclusion efforts will look different based on their size, the industry, and the location. So, welcome to the Intern Whisperer. Our show is all about the future of work and innovation. Okay, so welcome to the Intern Whisperer. Our show is all about the future of work and what do we think the forecasts are going to be. And we have the most great thing to give our listeners. We have John Crossman, who is the owner of Crossman and Company. He is coming back on the show. He is a second place winner for 2022 of the most views for video podcasts. A little round of applause for you, John. Yay. Okay, that means that a lot of people enjoyed your show. So, a little bit about you. I know that you're a businessman, and we discussed this on another show, real estate advisor, education and diversity consultant. And I know that's what we're going to be talking about here today. But some of our listeners might be a little new. And since we were picking up some new listeners end of year, it'd be good just to do a little refresh about your background. How'd you get started in your career, and what is it that you do? You do
Sure. So a lot of times people might sort of ask about the why. And I always tell people it really begins with my dad. My dad was a pastor and civil rights leader. And, growing up in a pastor's household, you grew up in a household that there's education is very important, community involvement is very important. And then you're kind of working class. And so I always tell people I became a devout capitalist at a young age. And so I really wanted to work hard and be in a field that could to pay well for working hard. At the same time, I never really lost that root of wanting to be make an impact and serve my community. So I actually just, I sold Crossman Company back in 2019. So I don't own that company anymore. And I did that because both my wife and my mom were having some health issues, and I had two middle school age daughters or early high school. And thankfully, these few years later, that both my wife and mom are doing better. And I've got one daughter that's a freshman in college and one that's a senior in high school, soon to be off to college. And in that time frame, I launched two new companies, and one is Crossmark Services, which is my real estate investment company. So last year I bought three shopping centers, and on top of that, I'm working on three different real estate developments. And then I have Crossman Career Builders. Crossman Career Builders is my company where I focus on social impact. And so we have 11 endowed scholarships at 7 universities. We have that's where my book's under, and I actually publish my mom's books on that as well. And I do a fair amount of public speaking, and I really like to talk on issues like race, mental health, suicide, addiction, stuff that's are challenging topics that try to come from a healthy place to talk about hard topics.
Yeah, it does. And I did just see that you were doing a suicide awareness walk just, I think it was last week.
Yep, Saturday, sure.
How big was the turnout? That is so important, and people don't want to talk about it, but it's really vital.
It's one of those funny things in life because you'll hear people talk about gun violence is a very hot topic, and you can get people talking about it very quickly. What you don't hear often is that 75% of gun deaths in America are suicide. And so if somebody says to you, gosh, I'm really passionate about ending gun violence, suicide would be the place to invest. There's been all kinds of research that law enforcement has done a good job to increase the safety of cops, whether it's through vest or different training, things like that. And yet suicide by of cops of themselves has gone way up. And so sometimes the danger is more within them than it could be with the bad guy. So the reason why I do the suicide walk and really raise awareness year round on the topic is I lost a good friend to suicide, and it's such a common thing. I want to help people to have those hard conversations and let them know that there's a lot of resources. There's so many resources. Like if you're listening to this and you lost someone to suicide and you're just inside, you don't talk about it. What I'm telling you is you can talk about it to save people, and it's going to help you live a better life. You will have a more fulfilling life when you learn to talk about it. And then the other side of it is that if you're someone who's having suicidal thoughts, you can talk about that. And there's people that can help you with that as well. The most important thing is whatever you're feeling in that spectrum, you don't have to be alone. And I will meet people all the time. I'll see them walking and they have a picture on their chest of a young man. And I love to walk up and just say, can you tell me about that person? And I met a couple on Saturday and they said it's our grandson. And I just asked them about him and hugged them. And, that's a gift I can give to help them heal. And other people can ask about my story and then I can tell them as well. So that's what we're trying to do.
Mm. That's just, again, it's so needed so that we can destigmatize it, take away all of the issues about mental health, and just everybody has something.
Yeah.
Statistically, it's supposed to be 1 in 5 does not have, um, 1 in 5 does not have a disability. No, 1 in 5 does have a disability. And I don't think that's true. I actually think it's 4 out of 5 really do. It's just that people
Right.
don't talk about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's to your point, it's like trying to make it so it's a more comfortable for you to talk about it and share about it and get healthier together. Storytelling is such an important thing. If you're trying to help somebody heal, you encourage them to tell and share their story. The only thing I'd say that is you need to share your story with discernment to people who can actually give you context and help you process what you're feeling. If you share your story with people that don't know, they may say things that are actually deeply hurtful. Like I always talk about, like if you're suffering and then you tell someone, they're like, well, God won't give you more than you can't handle. Well, that is not something you want to hear when your child just died, right? That's not it. And actually, as a Christian, what I believe is what we're taught is to help to feel the feeling of the person that we're with. There's a beautiful video. You can look this up. I think there's probably more than one where a woman is getting her head shaved because she's about to go through chemo, and then the hairdresser shaves their own head. Like that to me is like being very Christ-like. It's saying you're going through this experience. I'm going to sit and go through it with you. I'm going to experience it with you, right? And so if you're going to cry, I'm going to cry. Just like if you're going to have joy, I'm going to have joy, right? It's meeting the human where they're at, whatever emotion they're feeling, and trying to feel that with them, again, in the hopes to help them heal.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've seen that type of video that you're describing. It's very meaningful, and
Mhm.
it doesn't matter. You always see it and it just moves no matter
Yeah,
how many times you've seen it, right?
right. Powerful.
So, one of the things that we had talked about that you would bring up and share on this second show was going to be about historic Black colleges. Because in my company, Employers for Change, we talk a lot about what diversity and inclusion looks like. And it's inclusive of race, ethnicity, and all of the standard things that we visually see, but it is also inclusive of people that are usually under the radar. And that can be individuals with disabilities, the internationals, and veterans. I know that you have a very specific niche that you focus on, and I'm going to really look forward to hearing how you have been. I know you've been so supportive because I follow you and I know what you put out there. Historic Black colleges. So, my first question for you is, what would your biggest piece of advice be to somebody that doesn't know anything about DEI about how to get started?
So I always talk about how we seem to live in a culture that thinks I tweet, therefore I am. Like somehow, if I write the perfect tweet, that's somehow virtuous and noble. And people need to know that your social media is not currency. Currency is currency. And so, of course, there's a place for doing research in DEI and listening. At some point, we need to get defined by what we sacrifice for. So I often say, somebody will tell you they love something until you ask them to write a check, and it turns out they just like it,
Mm.
right? So somebody will say, "Oh man, I'm a big Gator fan. I bleed orange and blue." All right, well, will you write this check? And would you skip a family vacation and write a check so that this student can attend the University of Florida? Nope. Right. So they like it, they don't necessarily love it. And so if we're serious about DEI, we're really serious. We're willing to sacrifice for it. It's not admirable in my mind to spout off what other people should do. Like those people should pay more taxes for DEI. That company should do that for DEI. Fine. at the end of the day, it's like, what are you and I willing to do to step into this space and make impact? And impact, in my mind, looks like making some sort of sacrifice, making a financial step. So, into context to your question, again, these are just John's thoughts for their worth. Um, we sometimes can stretch diversity so broad, it can kind of miss kind of like maybe the original point. And sometimes what I've said to people is like, please stop adding different levels of diversity because we haven't fixed Black yet. Like, the Black population in the U.S. far more discrimination than any other group. It's not close. Like, and so in my head, I'm like, let's fix that one, and then we can start adding things to it because others are different. And race, the color line, is a very unique thing in America that we're a lot better at. A lot better at. People try to act like there hasn't been progress. That's insulting, ridiculous. There's been a ton of progress, and there's more things we can do. So HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, were formed at the end of the Civil War to educate the formerly enslaved population. In the beginning, many of them were about creating teachers and preachers. That's what they did. And so sometimes people say to me, well, why don't they just tap more into their alumni base? It's like, well, because for a long time, their alumni base was doing noble jobs that were low paying. When you think of the land grant universities across the country, those started with medical schools and law schools and engineering schools that were creating the highest paying jobs. Meanwhile, Black colleges were creating the lowest paying jobs. At the same time, the Black college network is very, very strong, and it's something that's really admirable. And so, what I always tell people, if you invest in your local HBCU, it's networked to across the country, right? So, for example, if you're based in Miami and you do a scholarship that benefits FAMU, and then you have a job availability in Seattle, I think you're more likely to see a Howard grad apply for that job because there's a recognition there. So I'm always trying to think through on any topic, what's the way to like plant, down a spike and pull and create leverage and make the most impact? Like what creates the most impact? And I feel like HBCUs have a really network system that we can create local and national impact on a lot of these topics.
Hmm. I was doing some statistic searches on HBCUs, and I was surprised. I really didn't know that there was so few. There's only 100 of them in the
Mhm.
country, and that's a significant number. So that, for students that are looking to go and be in a really good college, they're excellent, and then be supported by their own community, which is also inclusive of whites that want to
Right.
attend. You know, that would be a really helpful thing to have happen. So I felt like by, us talking about this, you and I, we're going to be able to help raise more awareness about it. And people may be writing those checks, just like you said. For those that can't always write a check, I think that one of the biggest things that they can do is they'll make sure that they're also walking with that person and supporting them and not letting somebody take advantage of them and just truly be a friend and an ally for them.
Well, I agree with that. And I would add on top of that is to make sure companies are recruiting there.
Yes.
I would never tell somebody to not recruit at their alma mater. If you went to University of Florida, University of Miami, FSU, like recruit there. Of course, of course. And it's not a but, it's not an or, it's an and. Recruit at Bethune-Cookman University and Florida A&M and wherever you are nationally at the HBCU in your area. If you're in North Carolina, North Carolina A&T, North Carolina Central, Duke, North Carolina State, University of North Carolina, like recruit them all. Just make sure you're broadening the net and recruiting at all of those schools is key. And the thing about it is that even when you're talking to Blacks in America who didn't go to HBCUs, I think that overwhelmingly they're aware of the ones that didn't go, aware of the role of the ones that where they play. And so, for example, 80% of Black judges in America went to an HBCU somewhere along the way. 20% of Black lawyers in America today went to one of six HBCU law schools, which includes Florida A&M College of Law in downtown Orlando. So when we talk about, if somebody were to say they want to talk about Black Lives Matters, they want to talk about civil rights, I don't know how you have that conversation without talking about the importance of FAMU College of Law and other HBCU law schools across America.
Mhm. One of the things that I have when I have students, excuse me, that come and work with me, and when they're Black and they're female, I said, let me tell you what the reality of what it looks like for when you're looking for a job. And then I rank, generally how it's going to go, where it's going to be, the male population and in that race order, and then the same with women. And I said, you're going to be on the bottom, and we're going to break that. So I said, I'm going to expect a lot out of you, so that when you walk in the door anywhere, people are going to pay attention to you. Now, I don't know what your thoughts are about that, but I want them to always feel that they're in a safe place with me.
Yeah.
I'm an ally, and I'm going to actually ask so much of them to help prepare them to be in that place where they're not going to back down.
Well, I feel for college, it's finding the right school for the right student.
Mhm.
And sometimes somebody will say to me, well, do we still need HBCUs? And my response is, well, do we still need BYU? Right? Like if you're a Mormon and you grew up in Aventura and you really didn't know a lot of other Mormon families and you live your life kind of quietly, and then you go to BYU and you're like, wow, I'm surrounded by fellow Mormons. And I would think that'd be very meaningful to you and help define yourself as a person. And so, or if you're military person, some might say, well, just go to any school that has RTC program. Well, that's not the same as going to a military academy. There's Citadel and all the other places, or VMI. It's a different experience, right? Both my daughters went K through 12 in the public school system, and they both chose to go to private Christian universities. And because they're Christians, they weren't always treated well in their public school systems. And both of them told me they wanted to go to a place for a season in their life to be able to have affirmation on their faith, because they it was the opposite in the schools that they were in. So it really depends on the student and where they're at, and to be affirmed in that. And then the other thing I want to make sure I just note this, because some people confuse this. HBCUs allow anybody to attend. In fact, there's always been a strong link between HBCUs and white women, because when they started Howard University, which is law school, there were white women at law school very early on because they couldn't go to the male law school, but they go to HBCUs. And so sometimes I had a woman on Twitter was coming at me about they discriminate, because she said historic Black college, like they only allow blacks. And I had to keep come back at her. I'm like, ma'am, they don't reject, anyone can apply. You can go there and be anything. In fact, FAMU's College of Law is about 50% Black, and it's about 25% white, 25% Hispanic. There are conservative Trump supporting Republicans that go to FAMU College of Law. It's diverse, right? It's absolutely diverse. So it's to me, it's like I always like trying to think about what's a solution to a problem. And so when we think about the subject of DEI, how do we find a solution? And for people living in Central Florida, if you're a small company and you don't have big financial resources, but you want to have a DEI committee or focus, you don't have to. You absolutely could call the Dean Keller at FAMU College of Law and ask them if they can help you, and they can provide you with resources for free, right? So and that's true across the country. There's a lot of Black colleges that have resources. They can help their community, help companies in their communities who maybe are not big enough to afford to have resources themselves.
That is a really good tip. I'm so glad that you shared that. So, for any of our listeners, be sure that you go and check these schools out. We'll make sure that we share a list of these, a link to the list of them in our show notes. So you'll be able to see where they are. Now, you answered some of my other questions, but we'll go to my second one. What should people look for to tell a company? Like, if I was going to go and talk to a student that is looking to find companies that are really pro diversity and inclusion, what tips would you tell a student to look for about a company? I usually say, well, you can look at the website. That's one of the most obvious things, right? But that doesn't mean it's a total disclosure as to what that leadership looks like or who the people are in the company.
There's a great I think it's a Netflix documentary about Abercrombie and Fitch,
Oh, I
and it
saw.
talks. You saw it, yeah, and it was really insightful because they're kind of like the worst disaster I've ever seen. That kind of stuff where they obviously had policies, and then they changed the policies, and then their leadership was still all one way. So I think there's a series of things, and I again, you know, I'm a little bit suspect of companies that have worked really hard to have a DI mission statement and write tweets, but if you get under the covers, not really doing anything. I'm looking for companies that are really doing stuff and investing. And I'll give you an example of a company that's doing stuff. Is Publix. I work a lot at, again at Florida A&M, and I'll go to Tallahassee and help with the real estate club. And Publix comes with me, and Publix is helping invest in students at the collegiate level understand what a real estate career is, and then they're offering internships to those students. And so I'm looking at a company. It's like it's not just a pretty statement or whatever, and those things do matter at some level. They're doing something proactive. It's part of their ethos and who they are. And so I would look at their board of director. I would look at where they're donating. I would look at those places and who do those companies say is a resource to them, who's helping them make impact. And I'm just always looking for ones that are doing some things that are more tangible beyond just sort of an easy quote or comment. I'll give you another group just because I want to honor them because I think they've done it. Is the Florida State University Alumni Association under their leadership there. It wasn't long ago they had alumni association. I was on it really before my time, but they were not diverse at all. And they worked really hard to make sure that their alumni association looks like their student base and is extremely qualified. There was no lowering of the bar. It's not like they became diverse and people got on the board that shouldn't be on the board. No, there is really smart. I always used to joke that I was the dumbest, ugliest, poorest guy in the room, which is true because that board is just such exceptional people. But if you look at their board, it looks like their university. And so I think companies are really making a big effort there. And listen, to be fair, I wouldn't get too judgy on the other side. Some places are easier to be diverse than others. Some industries that have been so white male dominated, they want to get more diverse, but they don't have as many options. And so I would have some levels of grace. It doesn't have to be a hard line, but you're looking for tangible steps they're taking to be thoughtful and impactful.
That's true. And I would also add to it is like check what comments that employees or previous employees have said about working in that company. That's, I think, very insightful. And sometimes you'll see it on social feeds, perhaps where comments come up. You can't dismiss them totally, but there are always hidden ways that you can find out more. And it could be standing in that Publix grocery line and you hear somebody mention a comment too. So good or bad. Yeah.
Yeah, fair.
Yep. So was there a time when you worked with a colleague that had a different background and culture than yourself? And how did you make sure to be inclusive of that person?
Let's see. That's a good question. I think that a big part of it, the history of my life in certain situations, is listening, and particularly when you're early on in a relationship, trying to listen a lot. My first year in real estate, my friends from that time said I didn't really speak for a year. They told me that was the good old days, right back when Crossman didn't speak. But I really try to be really intentionally listening, so I'm understanding. And then I think the second thing is, and I think this is true, I tell my daughters, like, no matter where you go in the world, it's really being respectful, leading with respect of other people's cultures. That if somebody's doing something and it seems different, not immediately being overly critical of it, but really trying to understand where they're coming from. I was recently in a situation, and my wife is from Mississippi, and she has a very Southern culture hardwiring to her about social interact with people. And one of the people we were interacting with was being a little bit gruff, and they're former military. And so I was just telling my wife, I'm like, you're talking about two different cultures come into interaction, where my wife is really listening and engaging and talking to everybody, and a military person who has a different worldview and sometimes can be a little bit coarse. And so not trying to judge either one, but really trying to listen and understand where that person's coming from. And so I will tell you, honestly, if you were to say to me, John, tell me big picture, where have you struggled with people in the workplace? I'll tell you the one group I struggle with the most. You ready? It's people who have inherited money. That's
Oh,
the group. Like especially early in my career, when I would meet somebody who it was really obvious to me they came from a wealthy family and they had everything kind of handed to them. I instinctively didn't like them. I just didn't like those people. I came from working class people. I came from people who work with their hands and didn't have anything, didn't inherit anything, and I just had a hard time relating to them, and honestly, I had anger in my heart against them, and it took me a long time. Now I have friends that were raised that way. I'm very close to, and I'm thankful that they love me and care about me, and I care about them. But that was not natural. I had to overcome that in my own woundedness and damaging myself.
Mm. That's really significant also because we can see people when they have either money or they don't have money, and we have a bias towards that because of a fear, usually it's
Yeah,
and that they're going to be using either if they have a lot of money power to do something that is not right, and then those that don't have money, it's always about, well, you know, how can we hurt them, and there's just this fear that's there in that whole chain of relationship. I appreciate that. I know that I think that it's fairly common, and thank you for sharing it. I think that people will see those that have money as people of privilege, and they might be invisible where they're not seen. And I think that might be one of the perceptions when, again, if we take time to pay attention to a person, not what they look like, but how their words and their actions, if they match, I think that's a better indicator as to what's going on.
it's funny. I just as an observation, I was thinking about this the other day. I don't, in many levels, I don't understand racism or anti-Semitism or anti whatever ism. And the reason why is I just am so focused on myself and what I can do to impact the world. I don't spend all my time thinking about those people. Like, I just don't understand, why would you spend so much time thinking, well, those people are causing these problems? Dude, you don't even know those people. Why do you even care? Like, focus on doing your job and make an impact in your life. Like, focus on what can you do. There was a gym I used to go to, and the guy next to me, we run at the same time, and he'd run the treadmill, and he would just complain about all these pro athletes making all this money. And I'm like, what do you care that they make all this money? It does not impact you at all. Focus on your life, focus on what you can do to help. Not I just don't care what LeBron James makes. It doesn't matter to me. It's like, hey, if he's doing great, taking his family, paying his taxes, good for him. I got to stay in my lane and stay focused on what I'm doing and where I can make an impact and where I can make an impact locally.
So, this wasn't on my list, but I am really curious because you grew up in a Christian household and your father was a pastor. Was your church a nice mix? Because I've always gone to churches where I didn't want to go where it was just one or the other type of a denomination. Now, I have visited Black churches and I like the energy that comes from them. But I also tend to, my church is a nice mix. So, there's Black, there's white, there's Hispanic, and there's Asian. It's pretty much equal on those three with us also. I usually work with in children's ministry, and I always have diversity around me. They're not all white people. So I look for those things. But in your church where you guys were growing up with your parents, what was your breakdown in the church? I would think that it would be.
Yeah. Well, my church, well, my entire experience was diverse, and it was diverse in all kinds of ways. When we lived in West Palm Beach, the church was a bit more white, but my school was much more Jewish and Cuban, right? And so my neighborhood was much more Cuban and Jewish. We lived in another area, and it was heavily Black and heavily blue collar, right? So I had a very much diverse experience all the way around. And even when the churches we were at were predominantly white, my dad was bringing in, President Bronson from Bethune-Cookman and bringing in his concert chorale. So even if there was a scenario where it was more white, my parents made sure it was diverse.
Mhm,
So I had a tremendous amount of that growing up.
mhm. It was a good influence there, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, it's just sort of story of my life, and I will tell you this, that in all the places I've been, and I've had a lot of scenarios in my life where I was the only white person in the room from childhood up till that still happens to me today. There were times in college where I remember being in places and I could tell there were some people that didn't want me there, and that was hurtful. But actually, what was more hurtful was when I was in places where people act like I didn't exist. And I can remember my training partner, I'm still close friends with today, was black, and we would walk across campus, and there were women who would say hello to him, and it was like I wasn't there. It's like I didn't exist. I wasn't a human being,
Mhm.
and I just remember being like that. That's a terrible thing. I knew them. I knew their names. They knew my name. I mean, we knew each other, and they just a complete failure to acknowledge. That's a hard thing. And so to me, it's like there's just a level of human dignity to all people that I think is really, really important. And I try to do that wherever I go. It's funny with my oldest daughter because now she's out of the house and living. She said to me, she goes, "Dad, you are really good at working class people." And I said, "Yes, yes." I'm like, "That's where we come from, and we treat working class people with respect because that's who we are. Really, it's who we are, and it's important. And not everybody really gets that."
Mhm. A side story was for 2 years I did not have a car. So I was riding the bus and it was really eye-opening because there's a misperception about people that ride the bus, at least here in Orlando, right? And I would go and talk to people. I said, "These are just everyday people. They're just
Yeah.
trying to make a living, and they're not filled with, whatever it is that they were thinking, mentally ill or whatever." There's some of those on there. I'm not going to lie about that, but these were just regular people, just like what you're describing. And that's pretty much how I grew up also. My dad and my mom taught us all to work, and if we wanted something, like I wanted contacts when I was in high school. My parents said, "Go get a job. You want them? Go work for them." And it was one of the best things that, of course, parents can do. They sent my brothers and I to go and pick oranges in Apopka with the migrants, and it was a valuable lesson too. So all of these things are good. I think it gives us a healthy balance as to who we are, and that we're
Mhm.
really all the same.
Well, and here's the other thing too, and I from my occupation, I've met all kinds of wonderful people, and I've had the opportunity to work with some extremely wealthy people, far more money than I'll ever think about having. And I've met some who are some of those generous, kind, loving people you ever meet.
Mhm.
I've dealt with some very lower income people who are some of the greedy, not nice people, right? I've worked with very wealthy people who were really unhappy and, lost children to drug overdoses and things like that. But, you know, I look at all people as having value. And so if you're the CEO, or if you're the security guard, you're the janitor, you're top salespeople, you all have value. That's just how that's how that works. And they all have humans, and they all have problems. And so sometimes people think, well, if I get to this, my life will be so much better. And it's like, yeah, maybe. Sometimes it isn't. And sometimes having less can be a lot more peaceful, right? So I always tell people, like, if you're climbing a corporate ladder, make sure that ladder is up against the right building. You might get to the top and be like, this is not the floor I want to be on.
So I looked up some statistics and I thought they were really interesting. So one that I think that you'll probably know I think you knew something about all of them, honestly. The Divine Nine, and it was a significant part of HBCU culture. And they were nine major Greek organizations at Black colleges and universities, affectionately called the Divine Nine. I went, well, that's lovely because I really feel like that's something that's inclusive of faith and that people could rally around that and just be supportive. Have you heard of that before? The Divine
Yes.
Nine? I'm pretty sure
Yes.
you did. I
Yeah.
didn't think I was
Wait,
going to throw anything at you you didn't know.
no, no. Well, it's always interesting. I'm always fascinated with subcultures. It's like if you and I got really into sailing, right? And we would quickly be like, oh, there's Joe down in Fort Lauderdale. He's got a dock there you use, right? There's subcultures and cultures. Like, so you could get into boating and you could get into sailing, you could, like whatever. And so when you get into black colleges, then you also get into the black, Greek system, which is a subculture and a culture, right? And it's on my to-do list. It's like one of those things I don't know what I ever get to do with it, but I'd like to. I've really thought about endowing a scholarship through one of the black sororities and fraternities, promoting real estate education, so that I could better leverage their networks to get exposure, right? To get more applicants. Like, My partner and I have a full ride scholarship at the University of Florida in their master's real estate program, so long as you went to an HBCU. And sometimes we feel like we don't get enough applicants for it. And so I've thought about tapping into that. So yeah, it's another component to that. And people are very passionate. So yes, that comes up on a lot of phone calls I'm on. And I'm
Yeah.
very respectful to all the great work that those organizations do.
Yeah, that is true. And to support what you said earlier, another fact, and these were just a number of facts and statistics that just people weren't aware of. HBCUs champion diversity and include Black and non-Black students from various socioeconomic groups nationwide and internationally. And you definitely spoke to that earlier, like, hey, white people can go to those schools too. It's not saying that you can't. Um, but I think that most people don't know that, and I think we always have to keep reinforcing the message.
Yeah. Well, like I say, it's I'm always about trying to find the right school for the right student. Let me tell you a story. There's a part of Central Florida, it's sort of the Oak Ridge area, which is kind of a blue collar working class area, kind of area. Some areas I grew up in. And if there's a young lady there, let's just say that her parents were born in Haiti and came to the United States, and she was born here, and she goes to Oak Ridge and she works hard and she gets a scholarship to Rice University. And everyone would be like, "Oh, that's so great. She should go to Rice University." Well, does Rice University have a Haitian employee and student population there that can help her out? Do her parents know where Haiti is, or where Houston is and where Rice is? Do they know how to get there? How is she going to get back and forth? I mean, there's all kinds of things that come up, and so maybe Rice is a good place for her, but maybe the better place is Bethune-Cookman, because maybe it's better because it's an hour away, and they have more of a Caribbean influence, and they have more resources there, and they have better mentors there. So some people have a thought process that you need to get more kids from marginalized communities and put them in kind of country club schools. Let's get this kid out of this lower income area and send them to Wake Forest or send them to Princeton. And the answer is like, yeah, I mean, that could be absolutely, for some people it could be. But again, maybe it's an HBCU. I had a guy come to me one time, and he was kind of arguing with me about HBCUs, and he said, "John, isn't there an issue in the Black community with not enough homes with a father present?" And I said, "Well, do you believe that that's a problem?" And he said, "Well, I do believe that's a problem." I said, "So if that is a problem, what is the solution? Would a solution potentially be to send that young person to a university with lots of Black male role models, like an HBCU?" And he looked at me like, "Oh, yeah, I get it." I'm like, "Yeah, you got it, right?" So again, let's talk about problems. What are solutions? Some people have a worldview, and they'll say America's awesome, and there's no really big problems, and just America's great. You can have that view. Other people are like, America's terrible. I hate it. We need to burn it all to the ground. There's that view. Here's the view I have: is America is awesome. It's a great place. And we have problems, and we can fix them, and we can heal them, right? We can keep working on it we can keep working on that American dream more and more and more. At the beginning, people don't understand, like when America was formed, it went from this tiny population to be able to pursue the American dream that expanded to this. That was huge, changed the world. And ever since then, we keep expanding it, right? That's the goal. We're going to keep expanding it, making more and more people be able to live that out and have choice. That's a big deal. So it's a great country. It's doing so many things so well. Let's just keep finding ways to work together and improve it. I'll also add this, that one of the quickest ways, if you want to gain power, if you're a person that's about power, not about principle, not about helping people, but about gaining power, one of the quickest, easy ways to gain power is to blame those people. Those people. You have problems, and it's those people, and they're scary and they're bad, and I'm going to protect you. And those people could be a minority group. It could be a race. You know what scary group could be? Rich people. Oh no, the rich people are so bad. I have to protect you against those people, right? That's Bernie Sanders, who I really disagree with, by the way. And my whole thing is like, if you live a worldview of there's an enemy, and I have to follow this leader and give this leader my money for an enemy, I just think that's a terrible way to live. I don't look at other Americans as my enemy. They're not my enemy. If they have a different religious view or they have a different political view, That's great. That people who have different religious views, I think, help me to be a better Christian. People who have different political views challenge me to look at my own party and question whether I need to, push in and challenge them to change to what they're saying and they're doing. It's healthy things to do,
I agree.
right?
Yeah.
So, in staying focused on who the enemy really is, it's not my neighbor for crying out loud. It's find ways to work together and to make things work. People, it's a very internal core thing for humans to be very tribal, my tribe versus your tribe. And one time I was lecturing at Valencia, and I talked about how I've lectured at 30 different universities, and the best students ever met were from Florida A&M, best students ever. And when I got done, the professor said good thank you to every panelist. And when she looked at me in front of the whole audience, she said, "You and your Gator bait."
Oh,
And she was so enraged. She was a University of Florida grad. In her mind, that's Harvard. And because I said I was more impressed with FAMU students than UF students, I mean, she was angry, and she didn't know I was a trustee at Valencia at the time. And I just tried to reach out to her personally, but I was like, ma'am, I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying this is my own better experience. But her tribal brain was coming out, right? It was tribal. And, when I do, I'm a Florida State guy. I've done a lot of work for UF. Some UF people don't like it. Some FSU people don't like it. It's not that I don't love FSU. I'm always going to love FSU. But I go where I'm wanted, and I go where people need my help. And I'll
hmm
go anywhere if I can work and help people. That's what I do. If UF invites me, I'm going because, there are students there need my help, and that's where I'll be.
hmm
But it's breaking down that tribal mentality and getting into a humanity mentality,
hmm
right?
Yep. Well, we're going to take a little break for our sponsor, Transcend Network, and then we'll be back to the show.
Transcend Network helps early stage startup founders find product market fit through weekly experiments, receive fundraising support, and build a global founder investor network for edtech and the future of work technologies. The Intern Whisperer is affiliated with Employers for Change, and we thank Transcend Network for being a sponsor of our show.
So now we're back to the second half of our show where we're going to talk about the future of jobs and industries in 2030. So I did some really quick statistical information to see what are the populations going to be breaking down when we go into 2030 and 2035. And it definitely does look like it's going to be a little bit slower, but there will be definitely more Hispanics. They're going to be coming up the ranks to be more equal with the number of whites, but then so is the same for Asian and also Black families. So we'll see that traditionally those families, Black and Hispanic, are larger, so they will be able to have more people in the households that are being counted, and that means that usually white and Asian have less kids. So we should see that beginning to get balanced out, but not by 2030 for sure. Um, there's a lot that's going on, but what do you think that forecast would look like in the future, 2030, 2035? How do you think that people can learn to get
Well, yeah, I think a couple things. First off, I had a friend tell me a great story in that when he was in middle school and he went to a public school in kind of a rural part of Florida, he walked into the cafeteria at lunchtime and the white kids were here, the black kids were here, and the Hispanic kids were here. And that's how a lot of high school, public schools, were like that. You walk in and there's these different sections. And then right after that, the internet was created and social media started ramping up. And he said by the time he was a senior, cafeterias didn't look like that anymore.
Mm-mm.
Because if a student walks in and they happen to be white, why do they have to sit over here? Maybe that student is white, loves a certain kind of music that also a couple of Hispanic kids like, and they go and they get together and they talk about that. Maybe they're into, Comic Con, maybe they're into sports, maybe they're whatever. And so all of a sudden that kind of breaks down a lot further. So when I think about the future demographics, I think you're going to see a lot more communities defined not by race and ethnicity, but by commonality. That's
Mm.
it. You're going to go to a soccer game and it's going to be diverse because there's lots of people who like soccer. You're going to go to a concert, it's going to be diverse because lots of people like concerts. And so I just don't think, I don't think it's as much as a metrics of measuring that it has been in the past, because people are now free to do what they want. I just recently watched the Netflix film, You People or Those People. I can't remember what it was, with Eddie
I
Murphy.
started
And
watching it. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that that's a great symbol of it. It's a Jewish guy and a black girl. They have a lot in common. They have a lot in common, and of course, their parents had to work to get over it based on their sort of old world views, which is a common thing to happen. But I just think it becomes about what people have in common as the biggest thing. It's not something that I'm worried about in any kind of context. I'm more kind of to celebrate just getting people together, have things in common. I do think what's interesting is politically, I think both parties need to get a better grip on it. I think the Democratic Party really has whiffed hard with understanding who their base is, and clearly, you would have thought not that long ago that Florida would have flipped and been a blue state. Texas would have that way, and I mean it's gone the exact opposite direction. But does that mean that Republicans have it, perfectly right? No. I mean, obviously, I think there's some things they're doing that doesn't always connect with their demographic either. So I think politically, because they're kind of paid to kind of put people in camps, they better stay on it, man, because I don't think there's any guarantees of what group votes what way in the future. And to wrap all that up with a little bow, I spoke to the NAACP chapter at UCF a year and a half ago. And one thing I told them, I was like, listen, no group should assume they has your vote, and no group should assume they don't have your vote. If Democrats think they have your vote guaranteed and Republicans think they'll never get your vote, you have lost all your power. You've lost your power. You need to make sure that both parties are wooing you and competing and talking to you and listening to you to try to make sure that there's influence there.
I agree. Do you see any ethical dilemmas that are going to be coming up, and anything in that area that are related to jobs?
Anything ethic related as it relates to jobs? You know, I always get frustrated when I see a lack of dealing with the real issue and then being dealt with forced issues. And so an example that might be if we were to say Black Lives Matter, not the organization, but the concept, and saying what are the issues that are most impacting Black life to live less as long as other races, and have an honest conversation what that is, and then the investment of resources and jobs to those areas, as opposed to which one is the sexiest headline that sells the most papers or gets the most clicks and things like that. So I think when I say that, it's like maintain the integrity and the resources where they need to be and not push falsely in one direction. So making sure that job creation is where there's impact, not for political gain.
Yeah. And because you mentioned resources, I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen this too, the government has just really, our government has rallied around finding funding for apprenticeships. Significant because they're distributing that between schools and nonprofits, where it's there to help, raise the bar for definitely career paths in STEM, but it can also be in those blue collar jobs, but there's still a STEM component in all of those. You cannot be a mechanic without being able to know how to. Now, you don't just go in under the hood and fix something. You have to go into the computer and fix something
Right.
in the car, right?
Right.
So it's not that easy anymore that like it was. So I feel like the money that's being put into apprenticeships, that is going to help level some of the field and raise up more ethnicities that haven't had that opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I would tell you this. I think that two generalized statements that I think are absolutely true about the future of workforce look like this. Number one, everyone has to be passionate about pursuing and understanding, respecting technology. Technology in our era is changing rapidly, and we have to continue to be on top of it and understand it and train it and support it. That's true. The second thing is to never miss the importance of humanity. That is also true. So there's some things that change and evolve, and there's some things that don't never change and evolve. So I always like to quote Napoleon, who said that men will die for the smallest scrap of a ribbon. And what I think he meant by that is that all humans need and desire appreciation. And so it's like a handwritten thank you note is still very, very powerful. When I get a letter and I can see it's handwritten on the address, and then like that's the first thing I open, right? That has meaning and value to me because I can tell somebody really went to some effort to try to appreciate something I've done for them. And so it's both those things. It's a technologically appreciation investment, and it's a never ending process. Understand the proportions of just having compassion and empathy and connectivity as a human being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I will add this because they don't teach handwriting, cursive handwriting anymore.
Right.
So if anybody's writing you a cursive handwriting note, just be really amazed at that because it's just something that's not taught. That means somebody
Yeah.
went out of their way to actually go learn that skill.
Yeah. Well, and look, I think it's also they're probably doing that because they know my age. They know that meaningful to me. It doesn't have to be that, but it does have to be a human connection point. For example, when we talked about the very beginning with the suicide prevention, you want to prevent somebody from suicide, hug them.
Yeah.
Hug.
Gosh, yeah.
Hugs are, I mean, that's a very human experience. I love my Great Dane, my dog Pepper. And one of the things I love about Pepper is such a good self-advocate. Pepper knows the difference between going on a walk and playing and taking a nap and cuddling and getting pets, when she wants affirmation, she'll cry until you pet her, right? And good for her. She's like aware of herself. But a lot of humans through their own trauma and tragedy aren't necessarily aware of that or know how to ask, and that can come out in some very, very bad ways. It's always funny. I say funny. It's sad. I'm intrigued by people who believe bizarre conspiracy theories and then promote them. And then if you ask them simple questions like, "Can you just give me some facts to back that up?" and they freak out. But when I do that, a lot of times if I keep pulling the thread, the most consistent thing I see is they've been through some really horrible trauma. And maybe that locking in that conspiracy is helping them process what they're dealing with. And I am not minimizing that trauma. What I have compassion for is how to help them realize and deal with that trauma in a way that's healthy so that they can be maybe more fact-based and not kooky conspiracy-based. I don't mean that disrespectfully. I just mean what they're
No,
struggling with.
I totally get what you're saying for sure. Yeah. Well, we are here wrapping up the show, and it's just been always delightful to have a conversation with you. Perhaps one time we'll do it where we're not on the air. We could just go and have lunch or something.
Yay, that'd be awesome. Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, and I appreciate all you're doing.
And I appreciate that. Thank you. And my apologies because I listed the wrong company at the beginning, but I have it at the end. What website, tell
Well,
our listeners, what website would you like them to find you?
the easiest one is the crossmancb.com. So www.crossmancb.com. And yeah, and I love hearing from folks. And, I also love feedback. A lot of times I do different presentations and speeches and different stuff, and I don't always get feedback, but I always love being in conversation. And if somebody has a thought or a comment or thinks there's a better way I could do something or impact, I'm happy to hear it.
Yep. I know what you mean on that one also. Well, anyway, I'm including your LinkedIn profile. Thank you for sharing that also over there. And I look forward to seeing what you're up to in the social feeds. It's always doing good work with positive impact. So thank you so much, John, for being here.
Thank you. It's nice to see you. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you to our video and editing sponsor, Cat5 Studios. We want to thank our production and editing editor, Josue Gonzalez, and our music by Sophie Lloyd. Visit Employers for Change at www.e4c.tech to learn how you can create real diversity and inclusion culture while scaling your people for the future. Thank you for supporting the Intern Whisperer by subscribing to us on Podbean, or you can find our video on our Employers for Change YouTube and Facebook channels, or you can stream from your favorite podcast channel.